Welcome to the Harkness 101 course. I'm so glad that you're interested in this work. Obviously, this is work that has been completely transformational for me. And, to be brief, the reason it has been transformational for me is that I don't think that there is work that's much more valuable for us than helping kids see each other in a meaningful way, hear each other in a meaningful way, learn how to collaborate verbally, learn how to actively listen, learn how to indulge their curiosity, and not just indulge it, but lean on it, strengthen it. In my work with the Harkness method, which began in 2017, I've seen and I've heard from students that what they're practicing, in quotes, at the table, are some of the most transferable skills that I am conveying to them. And I think that this curriculum that I'm going to go over and that Karen Rogers is going to go over in this course, hopefully, while there is some conceptual thinking, a lot of what you're going to see here is explicit. It is tangible. It's literal. That it is rooted in actual work that you can turn around and go and do. You're going to see worksheets and scales and activities, things that exist and that are being practiced. And I know that when I think about the PD that I have done in my career, that isn't always the case. And so my hope is that whether you want to go full Harkness and be known as a Harkness practitioner and have Harkness discussions, or you just want to have some new tools and not have discussion but have your kids know how to ask better questions, or somewhere in between, I hope that you can derive some value from these chapters and this PD. And I'm just so glad that you're here. So this section delves a little bit into the scaffolding of Harkness at our school, and also the definition of what Harkness is and isn't at our school. So first of all, I want to show you this chart. And anyone who's ever bought a piece of tech has probably seen a chart that looks like this. It's just comparing different tools. And what you're seeing here are three different tools for verbal collaboration. There are three different discussion protocols that I experience most commonly in schools. They're not the only discussion protocols that happen in schools, but they're the ones that I've experienced most commonly. Circles, which anyone who's been in CBU for the past 7 years will remember circles. There's Socratic seminar, and there is the Harkness method. So you will see that there is only one row that these all have in common. And that is that students are speaking most of the time. It is an opportunity, all three are an opportunity for students to be the voices that you hear in the room rather than the teacher. But there are a lot of differences, and I'm not going to go over these differences. You're going to dive a little bit into this document. I will just say broadly that circles, when I think of circles, I think of prescribed, literally written down rounds of discussion where everyone can see that we're going to do a whip around where everyone answers this question and then this question and then this question. So very prescribed, but there is a lot of equity there. And in theory, the airtime should be shared pretty equally, and the voices that are being heard are the students. Socratic seminar brings it brings the amount of structure down a little bit, in the sense that it is a little bit more like what we would consider like a typical discussion around a lunch table, for example. But I think that the defining feature for me when I think about Socratic Seminar is that, yes, it is a discussion driven by questions. Yes, the students are answering those questions, but that the person in control is the teacher. And more importantly, the person responsible for driving the discussion is the teacher. The teacher shows up with the questions that he or she want the students to answer. And all the students have to do is show up with their responses. There is a lot of value in that. Harkness method it takes the amount of structure and brings it down even more. And what Harkness discussion is asking is that, unlike in Socratic Seminar, the students are actually responsible for driving the question. What are they driving it with? They're driving discussion with their own questions and with their reactions to your content. The role of the teacher, if it's the students who are driving the discussion, then what is the role of the teacher? The role of the teacher is to facilitate. The role of the teacher is to steer the discussion in the direction that they want it to go, they being the teacher. Now, in a perfect world, because of something called a prep sheet or any prep that the teacher is doing beforehand, in a perfect world, the teacher will be saying very little in a Harkness discussion because the students will get there themselves. But the world is not perfect, and we know that sometimes a teacher does need to take a heavier hand. The expectation, nonetheless, is that the students are responsible. The onus of responsibility in the conversation belongs to the students in Harkness discussion. So the next document that I'd like to show you are the principles of discussion at CVU. Now, this document came out of a desire from non-humanities teachers to codify what Harkness is and isn't, because there was a feeling, and I take some responsibility for this. There was a feeling among teachers who don't exist in a context where they could put their class into a circle of 12 and have a discussion, where those teachers felt like, well, geez, because I don't do that or I can't do that, does that mean I can't have Harkness discussion? And I think that we as a school at CVU really needed to, identify what Harkness is, but also identify it such that it's a broad tent. It's a tent that includes a lot of different looks of discussion and makes it really clear that just because it's not a circle of 12, which is the most typical, the most traditional version of a Harkness discussion, doesn't make it less of a Harkness discussion. And it's important to tell this story now that I have observed in several math and science classes, and someone told me in a chem class, a student told me in a chem class this year that, in fact, that chem class, and on this day they were doing labs in groups of 5, that chem class was, quote, the most Harkness class that student had taken at CVU. And that class never got into circles of 12. Now, so that begs the question, why was that class, quote, so Harkness? And I think that these principles help to clarify why that would be the case. So, as you're going to see in the next document, the most important thing that we need to have a Harkness discussion is a classroom environment that values vulnerability, curiosity, and trust. Once a teacher has that, then the teacher begins to scaffold instruction to teach the skills of civil discourse. You'll see these probably referred to as soft skills in this course. Once the students have a mastery of soft skills, they're then put in situations where they need to have conversations where they drive the conversation with their ideas and their questions and their observations. At first, this starts in teamwork, which serves as a lab for the soft skills and helps them prepare for these discussions. And then ultimately, when the teacher feels that it's appropriate, they can graduate their students to a proper Harkness discussion. The next bullet really defines the role of the teacher, which is to listen and facilitate. And we're going to give you some examples of how a teacher can facilitate later on in this class. Lastly, once the discussion is done, students are reflecting on the dynamics to improve their own metacognition. So improve their ability to think about what is successful and what is not successful in a discussion. When you dive into that 3-column comparison chart, one of the things you'll see is that a Harkness discussion requires reflection afterwards. Socratic seminar in circles, that isn't necessarily the case. So at CVU, those of us who practice Harkness discussion believe that saying that you are going to have a Harkness discussion requires that you are enacting these 5 principles. Now, is there a problem with having a discussion that is only engaging 3 of these? Absolutely not. Many teachers at CVU are having discussion that, for example, may only employ 3 or employ 4, or they employ all of them and they don't use the term Harkness. All of that is completely fine. The point of these principles is to clarify that if a teacher is wondering, is this a Harkness discussion that I'm having, they can look at these principles and they can know, yes, I am doing those things even if I'm having this discussion in groups of 2 or 4. Lastly, this document explains the flow of scaffolding that teachers at CVU use to teach Harkness discussion to their students. And there's some redundancy with these principles. For example, the first step is pretty redundant with the first step in the principles. You're establishing a culture of trust. What's listed here are some ways that you can do that. And this includes, by the way, using CVU's Harkness student leaders to come in and model for your class. CVU has a group that meets during C3 of 10th graders who are getting independent study credit. And part of what they can do is they can come into your class and they can model a Harkness discussion for your students. So your students can see your students can see and hear what a Harkness discussion looks and sounds like. Then, once you have that culture of trust, you're teaching the soft skills. And one key thing to understand here is that soft skills includes asking questions. Writing really thoughtful and probing questions is so much more difficult than most students and frankly most adults realize. So I don't believe that there is an end to the amount that you could practice writing questions. And that I see as a soft skill, because if you can write a deep and probing and meaningful question, that means you can think of one in a discussion as well. But it takes a lot of practice. Then once your students have a sense of the soft skills, you can move into teamwork. And there is an entire section, an entire chapter in this class about teamwork. So I won't go into depth here. And then once you feel that your teamwork is routinely successful for almost everyone in your class, at least, you can move into Harkness. Student-led discussion, where the students' questions and thoughts drive the discussion, where the teacher relinquishes as much control as they can to simply facilitate and steer, rather than control and they drive or they control every step of the discussion. In Harkness, students have control to take the discussion where they want, and the teacher is really just providing that sandbox. I think that I'll leave it here, and we'll move on to the next section.